So we're back here with a Maya file with our rigged and modeled character here, and we're going to go ahead and start from scratch. We'll go through the process a little more quickly since we've already been through it once, but I will be going through each of the steps again. I'm going to go to my side viewport. I'll go to View, Image Plane, Import Image, navigate to where I have that series of images that I want to use for this example. Here is the series of images. We'll go ahead and select the very first image and open it. Now, just as in the previous example, our image plane comes in quite small. However, if we press F on our keyboard to focus in on it, we can quickly zoom in on it. I'm going to move it over here so that we can see it a little bit better. Once again, with my image plane selected, I'll take a look at the attribute editor here, and we'll check Use Image Sequence. Now it'll use all the images in that folder that use this file name of, in this case, walkv3.001, 002, and so on. So if I scrub in my timeline, you'll notice that we have our walk template right here. Now let's just see how long this sequence is. If I scrub in my timeline right now, it stops on frame 9. Let's just take a look at, we'll kind of zoom in on our timeline here and just take a look at what we have here. If we play this, you'll see it's quite fast, a little too fast, but we'll take care of that in a little bit. What I wanted you to take note of is, and this is why I chose these images for this example, we've got this terminology here that I think can be quite useful to understand when animating a walk cycle. So we're starting with our contact position. One thing that defines a walk is that at least there's always a point where one foot is on the ground. At any one time, there is at least one foot making contact with the ground. That's different than a run, where there are points in a run where both feet are actually off the ground. In this case, we've got both feet making contact with the ground. Our next position is the recoil position, the passing position, the high point, which interestingly, take note that it actually happens after the passing position here. And then once again, a contact position. This time it's the right foot forward, left foot back. You'll remember that we started with the right foot back and the left foot forward. We'll have another recoil, another passing position, another high point, and then it starts where it ended. It starts and ends with this contact position with the left foot forward, right foot back. Now, like in the other example, I'm going to do a couple things to this image plane that will make it a little bit easier to work with. We could go ahead and scale it now, I suppose. No reason not to. Make it a little bit easier to see. We'll move it over here because we're actually not going to be tracing it like we would in something maybe that could more accurately be described as rotoscoping. Instead, we're going to be using it as reference image because it would be hard to trace this image with this character because they're both of very different proportions. I'll go ahead and flip the image as well. And I can easily do that by scaling the x-axis. We'll just scale it, in this case, -20, and that'll just flip it around like this so that it's actually facing the same way as the character, because we're going to be having the character moving in this direction. Now, as I mentioned, the character is walking very quickly right now, too quickly. A standard walk cycle would probably be 2 steps in 1 second. I'm animating at 24 frames a second, so We want, in this case, our walk cycle to be about 24 frames or 1 second. If we were animating at 30 frames a second, we could make it 30 frames instead. But a 1 second two-step walk cycle is pretty standard. If we need a fast walk, maybe we would make it a little, we'd make it fewer frames. If we wanted it to be slower, then obviously we'd make it take longer frames. In this case, we're going to, again, just stick with a standard 1 second walk cycle. So, just as in the previous example with the Edward Muybridge images, I'm going to break this connection here for the image number. Now, I've got my image plane selected, and I'm in the attribute editor here. And again, if we scrub in our timeline, what we will get is the image number 9, and then after that it just stops. It doesn't repeat. We don't need to make this cycle. That's not really necessary because we only need 2 steps, but I will be making it cycle, and I will be breaking this connection here. So I'm simply going to go to frame, we'll go to frame 1. I'm going to right click on image number, break connection, and then I'm going to right click on it once again and set a key. We'll scrub to frame 9, and for the image number, we'll go ahead and type in 9, and we'll key that as well. And you can see that more or less we've got what we had before. Although we actually don't have exactly what we had. You'll notice that if we compare our frame numbers with the image number here, I'm on frame 1, and I've got an image number of 1. If I go to frame 2, it's still image 1. It hasn't changed. Go to frame 3, now it's changed, but it's actually changed to image number 2. We go to image 4, it entirely skipped image number 3 and went right to image number 4. So you can see that there's a bit of a problem there. It's skipping some frames, it's playing some frames multiple times. Let's go ahead and see how we can fix that. First of all, the question is, why is it doing that? And the reason is to be found in the graph editor, and it is specifically because of this slow out and this slow in. Remember that this animation curve is actually what's driving the frame extension in this case. So I'm going to select my animation curve, and I'm going to click on the linear tangents button. And now, if we scrub in our timeline, we should get a 1-to-1 relation, where it's frame 1, image 1, frame 2, image 2, frame 3, image 3, and so on. Now, the animation is still playing too fast, so let's make it roughly a 1 second cycle. And the way that we can do that now is by scaling this animation. So I'm going to, once again, go to my graph editor. I'll select my animation curve, and I will go to Edit, Scale, and we're going to scale it, in this case, with Edward Muybridge ones, we had more images, and we scaled it by 2 in the time scale pivot. I'm going to be scaling this one by 3. And what that's going to do is make this animation take 3 times as long. And because of the number of frames we have, that should be roughly 1 second long then. Now, it did move my animation curve over a couple frames, so I'm simply going to drag that back so it starts on frame 1. And if we take a look at this and see what we've got, here it is. That looks like it's a pretty good speed. Again, it's not repeating. We don't really need our image planes to repeat over and over again. We really just need these 2 steps. But I will make this repeat, just as we did with the Edward Muybridge images. And I will do so by going once again to my graph editor. And we'll take this animation curve here, and we'll go to Curves, post infinity cycle, and that will make our animation cycle over and over and over again, endlessly. As you can see, it'll just keep on going, repeating over and over and over again. Now, one thing I should mention, if you cycle your animation, as I have done here, and you don't see this repeating happening, what you would need to do is make sure you go to View and check Infinity. Notice that if I uncheck Infinity, I don't see the repeating in the timeline. However, the repeating still happens. So if you want to actually see that being repeated in the timeline, or the graph editor rather, in the graph editor itself, make sure that you go to View and check on Infinity. Now, walks are a really perfect example of an animation that you can do that is a cycling animation. In other words, it's something that can be repeated over and over and over again. And that's what we frequently create for games. We create a walk cycle of 2 steps, and then in the game engine, the animation can be applied to the character, and it can play the animation over and over and over again to have the character walk for as long as you need the character to walk. So we're really only going to be focusing on animating these 2 steps, but then I'll show you how we can make that animation repeat over and over and over again. Now, our animation is going to be about 1 second long, and we're starting on frame 1, so I'm going to go ahead and just focus in on that period of time in my timeline. In other words, from frame 1 to frame 25 in this case. And we'll do a couple things to our image plane that'll just make it a little bit easier to work with. Right now you'll notice that my image plane is actually overlapping my character here, so what I could do is just pull it back here like this. Notice that when I pull it back, it actually doesn't change the way that it looks in my viewport here, because this is an orthographic view, no sense of perspective. And because we're not going to actually be tracing this, we're more doing kind of an improvised technique of something very similar to rotoscoping, but maybe not exactly rotoscoping. I'll go ahead and move it over to the side here. If I want, I could bring down the alpha gain as well. And I think we're ready to start animating. So our reference images have the right foot forward, left foot back, in this case because I flipped the image. So we'll go ahead and do the same with our character. Let's go ahead and take his right leg, and we'll move it forward. And we'll take the left leg and move it backwards, something like that perhaps. As you can see, as we pull it back, the legs kind of get lifted off of the ground. So for the time being, let's go ahead and select his hip control here. And we'll go ahead and just lower that a little bit. We'll be animating the hips eventually up and down, maybe some side to side, maybe some rotating as well, but for the time being we're going to focus on the legs and feet. I'll probably be tackling the arms later, but I think for the time being I will grab the arms and go ahead and at least bring them to the character's side, something like that. Perhaps I should pose the hands in this fist position as well. So I've spent a little bit of time just quickly posing the hands in a fist, similar to what we can see in the drawing here. I'm going to go ahead and move back onto the feet and legs. So I want to work on the this contact position where we have in this case, the right foot forward, left foot back, and we'll just roughly pose it similar to what we see in the drawing here. So every rig that you use is going to be set up perhaps a little bit differently, how you work with the heel and the ball of the foot and so on. So you really do have to get used to however the rig that you're currently using works. In this case, I don't know this rig all that well, but I can see that when I rotate this, the heel moves, but if I select this control for the foot, I also notice that there is a control here called heel roll, and that will keep the heel planted on the ground there conveniently, so we can pose it similarly to what we see in the drawing here. And we can do something similar with the back leg as well, because there is a control here called the ball roll. And we can do something like that. Now I might do a little bit of posing on the upper body. I think it would be nice to, similarly to the drawing, maybe lean the character a little into the walk as they're moving forward. And I might arch the back a little bit as well, similarly to the drawing here. Again, I think I'll work on the arms a little bit later. I really am going to focus right now on the hips, legs, and the feet. Now, when you're working with a character like this, a rigged character, there are a lot of controls here, and it can get overwhelming very easily. And one way that you can maintain your sanity is by selecting all of the controls on your main keyframes and keying everything. So I've selected all my controls, and I'm going to press S, which will place a key on frame 1. And because this is a cycle, we know that the beginning of the animation and the end of the animation will need to be identical so that it can cycle seamlessly. So I'm going to go ahead and just scrub over to frame 25, the end of what's going to be my animation, and I will key that as well. Now, we could go through this step by step and pose it with each one of these moving forward in our timeline. But for something like a walk cycle, I generally find that it's easier to go ahead and rough out the legs. In this case, right foot forward, left foot back, and then I'm going to go to the middle of the animation, in this case frame 13, and I want to pose basically the legs in the exact opposite. So in this case we'll put the left leg forward and the right leg backwards. And because I'm going to want them to be pretty much in the same position that the right and the left leg are currently, I'm going to do a little trick that I will show you now. So I'm going to take the right foot that's forward right now, and I'm going to bring it back similarly to the drawing here. So I think the first thing I'll do is I'll get rid of that heel roll, and I'm going to go ahead and move the foot back so that it more or less overlaps with the left foot. Perhaps turn on the wireframe so we can see this a little bit better. And I'll go ahead and use that that ball roll just like we did on the left foot, and we'll apply a little bit of the ball roll on that foot, and I'll go ahead and key that. Right now I'm keying just the leg, so right now you'll see that the right leg is animated like this. And I'm going to want to do the same thing to the left leg. However, I run into a little bit of a problem here because now that the right leg is animated, when I scrub in my timeline, it, on frame 13 goes backwards. So here's the little trick I'm going to show you. what we can do is if we scrub in our timeline with the middle mouse button, notice how nothing happens, nothing changes here. Right mouse button, we see the animation. Left mouse button, no changes. Once again, I'll go to frame 13. We'll go ahead and get rid of that ball roll on the foot. Bring the foot forward. And we'll add some of that heel roll on there. And we'll key it. Now, when we play the animation, we have this. Now, when animating a character walking, there are actually a number of different approaches you can take. And one approach is to do as I'm doing, which is animating the character walking in place, as if they were on a treadmill. The other would be to actually animate them moving forward. So in that case, of course, I would be grabbing the hip control, moving it forward, and I would be taking the leg and then moving it forward, actually animating the character moving forward in the space. But instead, we're animating the character as if he were on a treadmill. But we run into a problem when we do that, and that's with foot slide. The feet will end up sliding if we're not very, very careful. So what I sometimes like to do is select my main control here. I normally don't animate this control, but sometimes I will animate it to make sure that I don't get any foot slide and to kind of determine how fast the character will be moving forward as they're walking. What I'm going to do, I currently have it animated. Well, I have some keys on it, so it's not actually animated because there's no change in value here in these values in the channel box here. But they are keyed. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those keys, and then I'm going to actually animate them on frame 1, and then we'll kind of determine the speed of the character like this. I just kind of eyeball this simply by figuring out, let's say that this foot is the one that's going to be planted. The left foot will come up and forward. So what I do is I'll just visually take a look at, for instance, this control here. Maybe I'll line it up with something here on the user interface. Oftentimes, I'll just line it up with the X here, side X, where it says X there. Scrub for one step to frame 13, and then I'll just move the whole control to line it back up with that X there. And we'll go ahead and key that. So now, if we play this, it'll look like this. I need it to continue moving at that speed beyond 13. I want it to just keep on moving forward. One other thing is actually, if we take a look at this control here and we look at it in the graph editor, what you're going to notice is that we have this slow in, slow out happening. We have slow out on that forward movement, we've got slow in. Now, one thing I showed you a little earlier was how you can take an animation curve, such as this forward motion, and we can go to curves, post infinity, and cycle it. Of course, what that means is that it's going to cycle, meaning it's going to go right back to where it began over and over and over again. So let's just see what this does. In fact, I'm going to increase the timeline so you can really see what's happening here. We actually want it moving forward at a constant speed. So simply cycling it is not going to do the trick for us. But what we can do is select the animation curve, and instead of cycling it, we can go to Curves, Post Infinity, and do Cycle with Offset. And what that will do is it will play this forward motion over and over again, but it will actually set an offset on each one. So it'll just continually move forward like this. Now, one thing you'll now notice, though, is that we have that slow in, slow out on that movement, on the forward motion of that. And we actually want it to be at just a constant speed going forward. So I'll go to my graph editor, and we'll make that linear. And now that control will just move forward at a constant speed. So far, so good. Now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on my timeline once again and have it be just 25 frames, because that's what we'll be looping here. And now that we've got this control moving forward, if I scrub in it, what we're going to see is that there's a lot of foot slide happening on the feet, on these foot controls here. And the way that we can eliminate that is selecting them. It's going to be the Z translate here that we want to work with. Go once again to my graph editor. And because the forward motion is linear for the whole character, we're going to go ahead and take the motion on these feet, on both the right and the left foot, and we'll make those linear as well. And what you'll notice now is that there's no foot slide here. You'll notice that this control is staying in one place until we get to frame 13, in which case the foot moves forward, but the left foot stays static, or at least the control stays static right now. So if we were to play this, it'll look something like this. Now, I normally don't animate this control, although I do oftentimes use this technique of animating it forward if I'm doing this approach to a walk cycle where I'm making the character walk in place. What I like about doing this method is that I can test it and make sure that the feet aren't sliding, but then what I can do is I can select this control and select all of its channels here if I want, and I can just mute it. And I can lock it as well if I want, which means then that I won't be able to change those values. I won't be able to key them. And you'll see that the character now is once again moving in place. But I know that when I actually move the character forward, based on the speed that I've animated this at, that the feet will not slide anymore. And then I can go back to refining my animation. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other positions that we have in our walk cycle. So as we scrub through here, we see we have our contact, our recoil, and our passing position, followed with the high point, and then back to a contact. I'm going to go to the middle here to frame 7 to what is called the passing position. And we'll go ahead and start posing the legs similarly to what we see in the drawing here. So in this case, the right foot is the one that's going to be planted on the ground. So let's go to frame 7 in the passing position, and we'll just make sure that it is in fact flat on the ground. I'm going to just take this heel roll and ball roll, and we'll just zero those out. Foot is flat on the ground. We'll go ahead and key that, that foot there. And then the left leg, the leg that is going to be lifted up and moving forward will pose similar to our drawing here. So I'll once again zero out the heel roll and ball roll. Depending on the rig that you're using, the controls might be different. The names of these might be different, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and lift the leg up and perhaps rotate it. Keep in mind actually that when we walk we don't lift our feet very high off the ground, so you can actually keep the toe fairly close to the ground, just lift it up a little bit. I think that should be good. We'll go ahead and key that. So now we have this. Let's go ahead and go to our other passing position. Go to frame 19. In this case, the left foot will be planted on the ground. Go ahead and zero out the heel and ball roll. Key that. And we'll select our right foot and put that in this passing position here. So I'll zero out the heel roll and ball roll once again. Lift up the leg, rotate it, take a look at it. I think that's good. And we'll go ahead and key that as well. Actually, let's make sure that we key the other one before we play, and we'll take a look at this. Okay, I think that's looking good. Let's go ahead and do a couple more keyframes on these feet here. I'll go ahead and select the right foot. What happens after that contact? Well, we get that recoil where it is fully planted on the ground. I'm going to go ahead and just zero out that head roll and, sorry, the heel roll and ball roll. Key that. I guess we could take this foot and probably, I'm not going to do anything to that one yet. This isn't quite right, but we'll come back to that one a little bit later, I think, and we'll work on that. I'm going to go ahead and select that foot though, and I'll go to its position here. Let's see. And we'll go ahead and put the foot flat on the ground like that, so that when the left foot comes forward here, it'll make contact and then the foot goes down. Now, one of the things that makes a walk animation challenging is that you can't just animate the legs independently of the hip. They really do need to work together. Because you can see as I move the hip, it's going to affect the way that the feet are planted on the ground, and so on. If we look at our reference images here and we play that, you'll notice that there's a lot of up and down with the hips. When you're animating a character, when you're animating a walk, oftentimes you end up jumping from the feet to the hips and then back to the feet, and there really is a lot of back and forth here to tweak them and to get them just right. Let's go ahead and work a little bit on those hips now. Working on specifically the up and down of the hips. So we'll go ahead and kind of establish maybe the height here at the contact, maybe something like that. I'm going to key that, middle mouse drag it to frame 25, key that so that it begins and ends in the same place. And in fact, with the up and down, we could go ahead and middle mouse drag it to frame 13 as well and key that. Because at least the height of the hips should remain the same for all the contact positions. But when we look at the other positions, for instance, contact and then we get our recoil, so you can see the hips are going down, the hips start going back up on the passing, and then they actually come to their highest point at this state right before the foot comes back down for the contact. So let's go ahead and start implementing some of that. We can come over here to our recoil. Maybe bring the hip down a little. Gonna go ahead and middle mouse drag that. And key it here as well. Goes down. Contact goes down. And then we're going to bring it up for that passing position. I might have to rework this a little bit, we'll see, but we'll go ahead and put that passing position up there. Middle mouse drag. Put it there as well. See what we have so far. And then according to this reference material that we have here, the highest point of the hips is actually here. It's not at the passing position, but in fact right here, right before the next contact. So we'll go ahead and raise it up. Be careful when you are working with this that you don't make the legs overextend like this. Try to maintain a slight bend in here, but you want to make sure the character's not always walking with knees bent like this either. So we'll go ahead and bring this up some. Key it. And I'll key it here as well. Let's just take a look at how that's looking. Okay, so far so good. It can use a little bit of refining. Let's take a look at what it looks like in the graph editor. Here's what it looks like here. Sometimes I'll go ahead and just adjust things in the graph editor itself. Because if you remember, actually, let me just work on this a little bit here. So what you'll remember is that here is the passing position, and then the highest point actually on the hips should be a few frames after that passing position. So I could do this a couple different ways. I don't want to overextend those legs. For the time being, I'm simply going to take these two passing position keys and I'm just going to lower them a little bit. You can see that lowering them in the graph editor will actually bring it down here in the viewport as well. And then there's one other thing that I think will be important to do here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and, so you can see this a little bit better, I'm going to take this animation curve and I'm going to cycle it as well. And you'll see a little hiccup in here that we need to fix. So if I select the curves here, I'm going to go to post-infinity and I'll cycle this, and I can go ahead and do pre-infinity and cycle it as well. And what you'll notice is that there's going to be a little bit of a hiccup right here and right here at the very beginning and end of my animation. It will get a little bit of slow in and slow out here, slow in, slow out here as well. But we actually want that to be nice and smooth, to cycle nicely. So I'm just going to select these two tangents and just adjust it like this. That should work a little nicer. That should be a little smoother. Get rid of any of those hiccups in it. So we can do a lot more on the legs and feet, but I'm going to hold off on that because they really are affected a lot by what we do with the hips. Some of the things that I don't quite like right now with the way that the legs are working that I would like to work on later. You can't necessarily see in our reference images here, but take a look at the right leg here, and right now I'd like it to come down onto the ground quicker. Right now it's taking 1, 2, 3 frames for it to come down, and I think that that should just happen really, really quickly, maybe over just 1 frame or maybe 2 frames. So I'll probably fix that. And then the other thing is the back leg. Right now it looks a little bit awkward where it comes up on the ball of the foot, and then when it comes up, that doesn't quite look natural. It looks like the foot is sliding along the floor surface there. And I think we could fix that as well. But I'm going to hold off on that for the time being because I think that it's going to be better perhaps to move on. Let's move on to onto the arms. We'll move on to the arms and start posing it similarly to what we see in the drawings here. So I'm going to go ahead and take that left arm. This is important to take note of, that when we walk, if the left leg is back, the left arm should be forward. Sometimes people will accidentally do the opposite and have the left arm and the left leg in sync, so they go backward and forward at the same time, and that can always look very strange. So remember, left leg back, then left arm forward. We'll go ahead and pose it similarly to the drawing here. We'll go ahead and just bring that arm forward like that. Perhaps bend it at the elbow, similar to the drawing here. And the way that the forearm right now is foreshortened in the drawing, it looks like probably the arm is maybe coming out like that. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scrub here. It's going to put these arms back. Let's just focus on just the upper part of the arm. I think it'll be a little easier to do that before I really start posing that arm. So I'm going to go ahead and just move the arm forward like that, and we'll go ahead and take the right arm and we'll move it back similar to the drawing here. Perhaps something like that. And we'll go ahead and select those controls and key them. Notice if I scrub, it's going to go just back to that position there, but we want these positions to be the same at the beginning and the end of our animation. So I'll left mouse drag and key them. So now the character looks like this. Let's go ahead and make the arms swing now. So I'm going to middle mouse drag to frame 13. I'm going to take that left arm, position it similar to the right arm, and key it. Now we've got the left arm swinging. Let's go ahead and make the right arm swing as well. Going to middle mouse drag to frame 13, rotate, and key. And here's what we got. So now that we've got the upper arm swing happening, let's go ahead and move down to the elbows. We've got that bend in the left arm, something like that. Maybe I'll go ahead and just key that now. Go to frame 13, and actually it looks like they even keep a bend in the elbow. Maybe we can bring it a little bit back like that. And we could do the same thing for the right arm. Perhaps put a little bit of a bend in there. And frame 13 will bend it more, something like that. Got a little bit of a hiccup there, as you can see in this arm. what I forgot to do was to take the frame 1 and copy it onto frame 25. You'll notice if we look at it in the graph editor that in fact that is what's happening. It's the key here has a value of just about 90 here and then a value of 0 here, and then it pops right back to that. So what we need to do, in fact, let's keep the graph editor open while I do this so you can see what happens here. Select my elbow control, middle mouse drag so that nothing changes on it while I go forward in the timeline, and we'll go ahead and key that. And now you can see that this animation of the elbow begins and ends at the same value or in the same position. So that gets rid of that little hiccup that was happening. Now the other thing that's kind of nice about this walk cycle that we're seeing in the drawing here is how it looks like with the foreshortening that the arm is actually coming in front of the body. So we're going to do that by rotating the shoulder. We'll take, for instance, this position here, and let's just rotate the shoulder, something like that. We'll go ahead and key that. Make sure you key it at the end of the animation as well. And we can do the same for the right arm. Bring it forward. Go ahead and kind of rotate it in front of the body like that. And we get something like this now. So with this walk, he's looking very determined. His hands are in a fist, and he's got a lot of arm motion happening there. Looks like a very deliberate and determined walk. Now, as I was saying, there were some things about the feet, the legs, that I wasn't quite pleased with yet. But I wanted to hold off on that because, as I said, whatever you do to the hips here is really going to affect the legs and feet. And unfortunately, with any kind of reference material, whether it's through actually live action video or in this case drawing, there's a lot that's not going to come across necessarily in your reference material. And one thing that I would be looking at with this walk animation would be, if we look at the character from the front, it looks very robotic. It looks a little unnatural. And some of that is, I believe, coming from the hips, that the hips are not going side to side. There's no rotation happening in the hips. And these are all things that we can add to our animation to help make it a little more believable. So maybe we can start introducing a little bit of that into our animation now. So some of the movement that we could introduce into the hips, besides the up and down, would be side to side, and I suppose even with some walk cycles we could even have a little bit of movement forward backwards like that. I don't think we'll do that with this walk cycle. We could also have rotation. We could have rotation like this. We can have some rotation in this axis. Of course, we could even have some rotation in this axis for our walk. We'll keep it pretty simple though. For the time being, I think we'll go ahead and just work with the movement from side to side of our character. So let's go ahead and give that a try. How I might look at this with the side to side would be that perhaps here on this passing position, the hips, to counteract what's happening here with the left leg lifted up, the center of gravity we need to move the hips over a little bit to, I would say, to the left here. so that they're more balanced over the leg here. So it's actually removing it to the character's right over the character's right leg, just a little bit. And we'll go ahead and key that. And then we can go to the equivalent position over here and maybe move the character a little bit over here to be more balanced over the left leg here. So we'll go ahead and key that. This is not going to look quite right, and I'll show you why. Let's see what it looks like here. Looks very jerky. The reason for that is obvious in the graph editor. Let's just see which axis that is. That is the x-axis here. So if we choose the translate x, you'll notice that we set keys on this earlier, and here's what we have here. So I think I'm just going to clean this up a little bit by getting rid of some of these keys here. We'll see how this looks. Maybe I'll select these curves and also cycle them. And we'll get rid of that little hiccup here with our tangents by doing something like that. I think this should look a little more smooth. It might be a little excessive. We might be able to scale that back a little, but still, I think that already adds a lot more believability to it. Let's try scaling that back a little. We can try scaling it up a little as well, just to see how that would look. That's one of the convenient things about the graph editor. Let's just take a look at that. So if I were to select this whole animation curve here, and let's just say I were to scale it and increase the side to side, we'll increase it to kind of a ridiculous amount. You'll see what that does. And we could also scale it back some if we wanted to just tone it down just a little bit, like that. And actually, that starts to feel pretty natural. Now, if we look at the drawing here, I think that we can see maybe a little bit of rotation in the torso. So let's see what we can do with that. I'm going to select these controls here that control the torso. And we'll add a little bit of rotation to those. So to me, it looks like when the left arm is forward, that the body actually rotates a little bit in that direction as well. Let's just try rotating it -4 degrees. We'll go ahead and key that. And we'll go ahead and middle mouse drag and put the same setting onto frame 25. And then we'll go to frame 13 and we'll just rotate it in the opposite direction. And go ahead and key that. See how that looks. Look at it from the front as well. Okay. And another thing then that I would start looking at would be the head. So if we select the head, one thing I don't like is all this head motion that's happening. I kind of feel like he would probably just be looking straight forward instead of his head rotating along with the torso. So what we could do is we could counter animate that. I could simply come here and key that on the beginning and the end, and then maybe come here and counter animate it and make him look forward like that. That would work pretty well. Or I'm going to undo that. Oftentimes these rigs will have a setting for you to be able to do that with. In this case, it is probably Oh, let's see, which one is it going to be? It's these controls right here, parent, world, root, and chest. You'd have to test your rig and see if it has a similar setting to it. But in this case, I'm going to change parent from 1 to 0. And I'll change world to 1. And that will orient the head relative to the world. We'll go ahead and set it back to 0. And we'll key that. And I'll key that at the end of the animation as well. And now you can see that the head looks forward always. In fact, if I were to grab this hip now and rotate it, you see the head always looks forward now. I can still animate it, but the head stays oriented the same, no matter how I rotate the character. Now that we have a pretty good foundation for our walk, let's go ahead and go back to the feet and start tweaking those a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and go back to this main control. If you remember earlier, I locked and muted it, so I can't key it and I can't move it either. But if I select it, I can come back over here and we can unmute it. And we can unlock it as well. And let's see, I think I didn't manage to do something here. I unlocked it, and let's just try unmuting it again. Oh, there we go. Okay, I don't know what I did wrong before, but now we have our character moving forward again, looking very deliberate in their movement. Feet are not sliding, so that's good. Actually, I'm surprised at how fast the walk looks. Let's go ahead and refine those feet a little bit. And here's how I think I'm going to do it. Again, I think that it looks like the foot to me should come down quicker than it is currently. Maybe over, instead of over 3 frames, maybe over just 1. I'm not sure. Let's just try 1 frame for the right foot. We'll just go to frame 2, get rid of that heel roll on it, key it, take a look at that. Let's see how that looks. And we could try it on the left leg as well. Foot makes contact, boom, and then we'll just go ahead and over 1 frame have the foot plant. Take a look at that. I think that actually makes it look a little more deliberate, especially since that's what this walk looks like, is a very deliberate walk. Let's work on the back leg as well. I didn't like how it looks like it's sliding along a lot. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to, once again, I'm going to use this side X here as kind of a guide. Or if you want, you could even just create a piece of geometry for this. And you could do the same thing. For instance, I could take this cone and maybe just put it here to indicate that that's where the toe is currently planted. Select my foot control, and I'm going to, we'll just see. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this or not, but I'm going to go ahead and go to frame, we can just go 1 frame over and see how this works. We'll take the foot, bring it back, take that ball roll, maybe add a little toe roll to it as well, something like that. Let's see what the drawing looks like. It looks a little more like that maybe. Or let's see, do I want ball roll or do I want heel roll? Here, let me just, I'm going to pop out of that, try that again. Ball roll, toe roll, we'll try toe roll. Here, that's not going to work. Toe roll's not going to work. Okay, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and actually middle mouse drag to frame 2. That keeps the animation, it slides now, the foot, but the other controls remain static. Go ahead and bring the foot back. There we go. Okay, that's a little better. Let's see. Maybe something like that. I think that looks good. Go ahead and key that, scrub, and see how that looks. This might be a little too much. I might undo that, but we'll just take a look. Maybe not so bad. And I'll go ahead and try working a little bit on the right leg as well. As you can see, it's a lot of refining. Go ahead and put my cone here once again as kind of an indicator of where the toe is currently planted. So we've got a really good foundation for a walk cycle here. I think that there are a lot of little nuances that would be nice to add to it, and I might do that in a future video. Some of the things that would be nice is loosen up the walk a little bit, maybe have a little bit of head bounce happening as the character's walking, a lot of other things that we can do with this walk animation. Maybe use a little bit of follow-through overlapping action on the arms so that we loosen up the arms as well. That could be really nice. But we'll probably leave that for a future video where I might revisit this animation. But what I think I would like to do is add more frames to the animation. I think that if you really want to show off a walk cycle, you're going to need to show more than just 2 steps. That's only 1 second of animation, and as you can see, that goes by very quickly. So, in fact, if I were to just play this once, let's just play it once instead of continuous. You can see that's not going to be very effective for showing people your animations if it's only that short of an animation. So let's see what we can do to maybe make this more like, instead of just 2 steps, maybe something like 6 steps or something like that. I'm going to go ahead and increase the number of frames that we're looking at here. Maybe we'll go ahead and just go all the way to, oh, I don't know, we'll just try frame 120 or so. And if we play this, what you'll see is that the character keeps on moving forward, but it doesn't continue to actually be animated. At least the hips are, but that's because we actually cycled that earlier. So I think what we want to do with this would be to go ahead and cycle the rest of our animations here. Everything with the exception of this base control, which we actually want to have that cycle with offset, but everything else we don't really need to have the cycle with offset. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of my keys here. Maybe I'll go ahead and just key everything on frame 1 and on frame 25, which is the end of the animation cycle there. Make sure I didn't bust anything. It looks like I have something going on now with the leg that I don't want, so let me go and undo that. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and go back to just 25 frames while we look at this. And maybe we'll just start with the feet first. We'll start with those. Select both of them. Let's see, we'll just key it on frame 1, making sure that everything is keyed on it. Go to frame 25, key everything. Make sure nothing weird is happening there. It looks good. And in fact, let's just try doing this to just the feet first and make sure that it looks okay. I'm going to go to the graph editor, and we'll go ahead and select all the animation curves here. Go to curves, pre-infinity cycle, and curves post-infinity cycle. That'll make them repeat endlessly. And we'll just test that out. So you can see that the feet keep on going, but the upper body stops animating right after frame 25. The upper body, the arms, the torso don't animate anymore. Let's go ahead and select those controls, and we'll just make sure that we have everything keyed on frame 1, everything framed on the last key of this cycle. Go ahead and go to our graph editor and select everything. Go to curves, pre-infinity cycle, and curves post-infinity cycle. And now our character, nope, still not working. What have we missed here? What have we missed? Looks like everything is good here. But it is not. Okay, so I've encountered a problem that I think I've experienced this problem before, but not very frequently. I'm not sure why, but I have cycled all of the animation on all the parts of the body on the character, and when I play it, uh, they don't cycle. You can see that they're not cycling, although if we actually look at it in the graph editor, we'll just select one of the controls, for example, that's not cycling, the shoulder, for example. If I look at it in the graph editor, you'll see that it in fact is supposed to be cycling, and for whatever reason, it is not currently doing that. Okay, so how have I resolved this? Let's see if this works. I tried it out briefly while not actually creating a video. Just a few minutes ago. Let's see if this works again. It's a bit of a hacky solution. If it does work, I don't, again, understand why it's not cycling properly. But as you can see, if I scrub in the animation, everything looks good until it gets past frame 25, and then the animations are not cycling. Okay, the feet aren't moving forward and backward, the body's not rotating, and so on. So here's what I did. I simply saved it. Okay, I'm just going to save this file. I think if we scrub it, it's still not going to be working. But let's just try reopening this file. Again, it shouldn't work this way. It should do better. But I'll go ahead and open it up. Same exact file, and everything is cycling now. So again, a weird little glitch. Don't know why it was doing that, but it does appear to be working now. Okay. Let's just take a look at this walk while we maybe hide these controls. So I'm going to go to Show, None, and we'll say Show Polygons. Hopefully that's everything. I don't think we had any NURBS surfaces in here that we needed. And let's just see how this looks if we play our animation. And it appears to work. I'm going to put this on looping or continuous. And as you can see, this is going to be a much more effective way to show off your animations rather than just having two steps. If you have the character walking for a little bit longer, like 4 seconds or 6 seconds or so, I think that would be a much better way to show off your animations. So I think this video is getting quite long, so I think we will wrap it up here. This animation could certainly use some refining, as I had mentioned before. Some nice follow-through overlapping action, perhaps in the arms, maybe a little bit more work on the hips, perhaps adding some rotation to them, for example. But for the sake of this video, I think that's good enough. And perhaps I'll revisit this animation in a future video where I can maybe add some of those nice little refinements to it. Anyway, I hope that this video is helpful for you, and thank you for watching.